Hello, everyone. My name is Desiree Neilson, RD, and I am so thrilled to be with you for the Canadian Digestive Health Foundation's Trending Now event. And my session is going to be all about little dietitian tips and tricks for mastering the low FODMAP diet. First, a slide of disclosures. As you can see here, I am a paid spokesperson and collaborator for multiple brands, including BioK Plus Probiotics, who have supported my work here today, as well as Silver Hills Bakery, Half Your Plate Canada, and others. So what are we going to learn today? So we are going to talk about not just an overview of which foods are high FODMAP and low FODMAP, because that information is widely available online. We're going to get a little bit more under the hood of the low FODMAP diet. So we're going to talk about what a FODMAP actually is and how it works in the body and why going low FODMAP may decrease your symptoms, as well as when we're on the low FODMAP diet, like what's our troubleshooting? How do we get more fiber? How do we deal with things like eating out? If we're plant-based or simply want to eat more plants because that's what our healthy eating guidelines in Canada suggest, like how do we do that when so many plants are high FODMAP? We're also going to talk, because I am a cookbook author and I really, really love delicious food, how to be able to cook flavorful meals without garlic and onions, because that can be really difficult for some people. And then, as I mentioned, we'll talk about how to dine out on a low FODMAP diet, as well as answer a couple of Q&As, which were sent ahead of time. So what the heck is a FODMAP anyways? I think a lot of people think of FODMAPs as fibers, which is not correct. If we think of the macronutrients, so we have carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. FODMAPs are carbohydrates, but they're carbohydrates that are a little bit different than, say, simple sugars. They are carbohydrates that you cannot digest and absorb. And whenever you cannot digest and absorb something, they remain in the gut, which means they travel through the gut where they can interact with your gut tissues as well as with your gut microbes. And these can be things like the fructose and lactose. So fructose is a naturally occurring sugar we see in fruit, but then also in more industrial sweeteners like high fructose corn syrup. Lactose is the sugar naturally occurring in dairy products. These FODMAPs, the sugars, we call them osmotic sugars. So they influence symptoms by drawing water into the gut, which can loosen up the stools, giving you that sort of like telltale loose stool or diarrhea of lactose intolerance, for example. That can also be happening in irritable bowel syndrome. FODMAPs also, because they're interacting with your gut microbiome, essentially you're like serving a buffet. You're saying, here you go, gut microbes. Here's your food, go to town, and they ferment, which is how they digest and absorb things. So when they ferment these FODMAPs, the fermentation of the FODMAPs can increase gas and bloating in the gut. You're feeding that gut microbiome, which most of the time is a good thing. And as a gut health dietitian, I want that to happen. But when our gut microbes are a little bit off, as can be the case in IBS, or when we have hypersensitive guts, because something that's really interesting in irritable bowel syndrome is we immediately assume that someone with IBS makes a lot of extra gas. And some research has suggested that that's not exactly the case. Someone with IBS might be making the same amount of gas in response to certain foods as someone without it. However, because of the nervous system, the enteric or gut-based nervous system in the gut, it becomes hypersensitive. When gas expands the gut space, our nervous system interprets that as pain, as opposed to just like, oh, we're getting a little gas, we're getting stretched. Instead, it interprets it as pain. So we have these very sort of like mechanical, physiological ways that FODMAPs, such as lactose or fructans in wheat, can increase symptoms in IBS, but there appears to be some other things going on. And one of the things that's most interesting, but also often most challenging about IBS is we're learning new things about it every single day. And so right now, some of the research suggests that FODMAPs may also increase low-level inflammation in the gut, that it might alter the motility, which is the movement of the gut, as well as gut barrier function. So the idea of the gut being a barrier, just like your skin is, trying to keep the outside world out And if that gut barrier falters, it can incite more inflammation because the gut and the immune system are very, very close together. The other thing that FODMAPs may be doing, because they're food for bacteria, is that if you have an overgrowth of bacteria, and for some people with irritable bowel syndrome, this may actually be a result of a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, that these FODMAPs can also feed this overgrowth. So when we go low FODMAP, we're doing the opposite of all this. And so why does it work for IBS? Well, it doesn't work for everybody. And this is a really important point to make. I think a lot of people have seen this statistic that going low FODMAP can improve symptoms in 50 to 80% of people. But if you flip that, that also means that going low FODMAP doesn't work in between 20 and 50% of people. Because I think for sometimes when we put so much effort into a dietary protocol like this and it doesn't work, we somehow feel like maybe there's something wrong with us or we've done something wrong, when the reality is it just doesn't work for everyone, which is frustrating, but this is what we see in the research. And so when you're removing these FODMAPs, or we're not entirely removing them, but we're lowering them under the threshold of our tolerance, right? You can think of like your tolerance as being a cup. And if you overfill that cup, if it overflows, you get these symptoms. But if you only fill it a little bit, so within your tolerance, you're not going to get these symptoms. And that's what we're trying to do in the low FODMAP diet. And in doing so, we decrease that osmotic or water attracting pressure. So hopefully our stools are not so loose. We also decrease food for the gas producing bacteria, which means less gas and bloating, or bacteria that might be associated with more inflammation. So there are a lot of pros and cons. And believe me, I am so grateful to have such an evidence-based therapeutic nutrition option in my practice as low FODMAP. But just because it can be effective doesn't mean it's not without its pros and cons. So pros obviously provide symptom relief in many people. It's incredible to watch someone improve when low FODMAP is the right thing for them. The other pro is that it's not permanent. And this is a really important point to stress, because as much as most dietitians will say, low FODMAP is a temporary learning diet. Temporary, not permanent, learning, because we are here to understand how FODMAPs affect us specifically, because it's very individualized. Even still, we have people coming into our practice who have been on low FODMAP for 6 months, 12 months, or years, and that's not how the diet is meant to be used. The other thing that's great about low FODMAP is that it does start to address some of the root causes of symptoms, including the microbiome and also the intolerance to things like lactose and fructose that can be leading to that osmotic pressure and those loose stools. The other thing that's really great about it when it works for you is that it feels very empowering, because you now can make a change that can improve how you feel. Many things like our genetics, even sometimes our stress levels, are variables we don't have control over, but some of us are lucky enough that we can actually make change in our nutrition. And that gives us something that we can hold on to, that we're really taking an active role in making ourselves feel better. Cons, it doesn't work for everyone. If you go through and you do this and you're like, all this effort, and then you don't feel better, it kind of sucks. I'm not going to lie. The diet is also a little bit complicated, right? There's a long list of foods. It's not necessarily intuitive which foods are low FODMAP and which are high FODMAP. So, for me, I've always got my low FODMAP app, my Monash app beside me to say, oh, okay, what's the serving size? Is this food low FODMAP? Is this food high FODMAP? It's a really helpful tool. The other issue is that it may negatively impact the gut microbiome. So we don't have a lot of long-term feeding trials with low FODMAP. The information that we do have suggests maybe it is negatively altering our gut microbiome, although there's been some new research to suggest otherwise. Like I said, this is an evolution. But if we're starving out our gut microbiome by not giving them a lot of food to eat, theoretically, this could be the case, and we don't want that to happen long term. can also negatively impact your relationship with food, which is why for anyone with a history of disordered eating who is in recovery, this is not the diet for you. We will try something else for your IBS in our private practice. You want to make sure you are not going on a restrictive diet when you have a history of disordered or restricted eating. The other thing, because we are removing foods, which no dietitian ever likes to do, we always want to help you eat more of things. But when we do restrict foods, we can have reduced fiber intake as well as reduced intake of things like calcium, zinc, iron, vitamin D, and folic acid. And all of these things are really important to keeping your immune system strong and for your long-term health. So let's talk about one of the troubleshooting pieces. And the first is fiber. So as a digestive health dietitian, of course, I am big on fiber. And we know for the general population, when we're talking long-term, consuming enough fiber, which most North Americans do not do. We typically get like about half on average of the fiber we're recommended to intake. Fiber is a great thing. But if you have IBS, it can make you feel terrible. And this is where these both things can be true, which is a nuance that often we don't see on the internet when talking about nutrition. But the first things first, many people, when they come to see us with IBS, are already naturally eating a low fiber diet to sort of like keep their symptoms managed. Why does this work? Because we can't talk about, why we maybe don't want to do this without also acknowledging that sometimes it makes people feel better. And the reason why is, as I said on an earlier slide, anytime there is a food substance that you do not digest and absorb, it means it stays in the gut, it interacts with the gut tissues, as well as it interacts with your microbiome. Fiber is that. So while not all fibers are fermentable or can be munched by gut bacteria, these fibers in the gut, in a hypersensitive gut, can be really irritating, or they can also be fermented, increase gas and bloating. So when you remove them, you're removing that, just sort of like how we do with a low FODMAP diet. And some fibers, specifically like insoluble fibers, we call them like the scratchy cereal fibers or the tough cell walls of certain fruits and vegetables, they can increase those symptoms all on their own. But when we go low FODMAP, when we remove these high FODMAP foods like legumes and whole grains, almost across the board, your fiber intake is going to decrease. Like this just happens because the vast majority of the fiber in our diet for most people are coming from whole grains and legumes. Yes, nuts, seeds, fruits, vegetables all contribute, but these are major players in our fiber intake. And so sometimes when people go low FODMAP in order to get a handle on their digestive symptoms, this can further negatively impact their bowel movements. In addition, particularly, and we're going to talk a little bit about this in a moment on plant-based diets, fiber helps us to feel full and satisfied. And so when we reduce fiber, we can get this sensation, and I hear this all the time. It's like, well, I'm going low FODMAP, but I'm feeling hungry all of the time. What do I do? There are multiple factors we can address, like protein, healthy fats, but fiber is another one. So the best way to sort of like address that is to figure out how we can get tolerated fibers into our diet while we are low FODMAP. The other thing we want to talk about is fiber training. Some of you might hear it, fiber training or building tolerance. Often when the gut is heavily irritated or heavily inflamed and everything feels wrong, any fiber is going to feel super irritating to you. And so we get this idea that fiber is not for us. But I promise, for every person, we will all have different tolerance levels. Fiber is for every person, and every person wants to get the most fiber that they can tolerate into their diet for long-term health of their gut. And the way you think about it is this: your gut is a muscle. You need to train it for high fiber life the same way you would train your body for a half marathon. So if you are on a low fiber diet, you are not going to go and eat a 3-bean chili twice a day overnight. It's going to feel terrible. Even someone without IBS is going to have a hard time dealing with it. They're going to be gassy, they're going to be bloated, they're going to be miserable, and they're going to say, nope, fiber is not for me. Instead, the intelligent way to do this is to go low, start slow, and be super, super consistent. And with IBS and irritated guts in general, the predominantly soluble fiber sources like oats and oranges are often better tolerated. These foods will often be easier to digest, but soluble fiber is less scratchy. It forms a gel. And so it holds water, and soluble fiber can be great for regulating bowel movements, whether you lean towards the constipation side of things or the diarrhea side of things. And some soluble fibers will be fermented, so they will feed the gut microbiome even when we're low FODMAP, which is a great thing. The other thing you need to remember is that fiber needs water to do its job. If you are one of those people who don't drink a lot of water and then you want to start adding fiber, too much fiber, too little water can actually have the opposite effect. So it can push you towards the constipation side of things, which means more gas, more bloating, more misery, and I don't want that to happen for you. So a little way that I think about things in my practice, I wanted to share some low FODMAP, high fiber foods. This level 1 and level 2 is not an official thing. This is just the way when I'm working with people in terms of fiber tolerance and fiber training, I sort of think of foods in these ways. The first batch, the level 1, are foods that are more soluble fiber focused, yes, but they also tend to be a little gentler on digestion. So we're talking things like blueberries, kiwis, raspberries, and all of these portions here are the low FODMAP portion. So a great example is 1/3 of a cup of raspberries. If you're like, well, I would always eat much more than that, 1/3 of the cup is the low FODMAP portion. And raspberries are so high in fiber that even at just 1/3 cup serving, you get 3 grams, which is incredible. So level 1 foods, if you are working with a dietitian or if you are on your own fiber training, start with the level 1 foods. Try one of these foods a day. Add one of these foods a day to your life. Be consistent with it. If after 3 or 4 days you're like, no, I rocked that, that felt fine, go ahead and add another one. And then once you've done a lot of these, then you want to level up to the level 2 foods. It's not that they necessarily have more fiber, as you will notice. Again, we're in the low FODMAP portions, but it's that they tend to be a little harder to break down, a little bit more insoluble fiber, or just a little bit more fermenty, if we can make that a technical term. So things like raw carrots, raw kale, popcorn, quinoa, lentils, potatoes with skin, walnut halves. So what does this actually look like? How do you stay low FODMAP, but then get more fiber? And so, I mean, really, this is like pretty average foods, right? So like you would have some oats with some peanut butter, maybe some frozen blueberries, some chia seeds, a little bit of quinoa salad with some easier to digest vegetables, a baked potato with the skin with some sauteed kale and some chicken or tofu, and then like some basic snacks. The other thing that I wanted to address as a plant-based dietitian with IBS herself is the concept of plant-based eating, because you may be vegetarian or vegan and then find yourself with a diagnosis of IBS. And what I've seen in my practice is that so often when this happens, people are being told that they cannot maintain their vegetarian and vegan diet now that they have IBS, and that could not be further from the truth. The other thing for the rest of us, for us omnivores, most of us are just trying to eat more plants, right? That's general healthy eating. So it's like, how do we think about our long-term health while we're also avoiding FODMAPs? So something you have to think about in terms of plant predominant diets is that they're naturally higher in fiber and FODMAPs because we get these from all our whole plant foods. And when we reduce the whole grains and legumes, getting enough protein, if you're exclusively plant-based, getting enough protein and minerals is going to be more difficult. So it's calcium, iron, and zinc, things that can be more challenging just on a low FODMAP diet in general. When we're plant-based, we double down on those things. So we really want to focus on good sources of these nutrients while we're low FODMAP. A great example is for calcium, almond milk, macadamia milk, tahini, which is a wonderful sneaky source of calcium, as well as greens like kale and tofu. Calcium set tofu per serving is roughly equivalent to the calcium in a glass of dairy milk, so it's an awesome option. Plus, we have our top iron sources. Again, tofu is there. Tofu is so helpful if you are plant-based or looking to eat more plants while you're low FODMAP. It's a great protein-rich option that is also low FODMAP and not too high in fiber. So a few hacks that I use in developing my recipes in my practice to get more nourishment when you're plant-based and low FODMAP. The first is to make creamy sauces and dressings with tahini. It has a really lovely, creamy texture. It's very rich, it's really delicious, but it's also neutral enough that it doesn't overwhelm recipes. So it's going to be a great way to add extra minerals. You can use crumbled tofu in tacos, pasta, and chili. You can add edamame, so green soybeans, to salads instead of other legumes like black beans that are going to be higher FODMAP. You can blend hemp hearts into a milk if you need a protein-rich beverage to sip as a snack. You don't need to soak them. You don't need to strain them. You just blend them up with some water. Really easy, a little bit of sweetener, and it's very delicious. The other thing you want to do when you're not consuming things like wheat is you want to vary your starches. So rice sometimes, quinoa sometimes, millet, gluten-free pasta, potatoes. Not only is this important for general nutrition, but it's also to bust boredom. If you're only eating rice or only eating quinoa, by like 10 days in, you're gonna be like, I can't stomach any more of this. So you really wanna like switch it up. The other thing you want to do, which is something that people forget, is you do want to continue to include nuts and legumes in your diet in their low FODMAP portions. Going low FODMAP doesn't necessarily mean no legumes. We know that a quarter cup of lentils or chickpeas, canned and very well rinsed, are a low FODMAP portion. So keep a small amount of these foods in your diet to boost fiber and protein. The next part of this is, even if low FODMAP is short term, if you're not enjoying what you eat, it feels far too long term. So the goal is to build a low FODMAP way of eating that you really enjoy. And part of that is building flavor. Particularly when we're doing food restrictions, it can be really easy to start eating just simpler, more bland meals, which are not necessarily very exciting. And when we lose garlic and onions, it does mean less umami, which is, that fifth taste that really sort of creates that sense of deliciousness in our food. So the most important thing to do is to seek out new low FODMAP recipes that are designed right out of the gate to be low FODMAP, because they're designed to be delicious while also being low FODMAP. And then get really, really heavy-handed with flavor boosters, which we're going to talk about in a sec. The first thing you need to know, which is like good news for low FODMAP, is that almost all herbs and spices are low FODMAP in very generous amounts. So if you're the kind of person who would like put like a tiny little sprinkle of a spice and then sort of like drown it in like cream or cheddar cheese, we're going to do the opposite now. You're going to be heavy-handed and measure your spices in scoops and spoons, not pinches. 1 teaspoon of spice per serve, which means if you're making 4 servings, 4 teaspoons of spice, easily low FODMAP, along with 1 cup of herbs. So use your spices in the cooking and then finish your dishes with mint, with cilantro, with parsley, with basil. Be heavy-handed and you are going to experience a whole new level of flavor and keep it low FODMAP. The other thing when you're cooking, and something as I was learning to cook, because I'm a self-taught cook, that really, really changed how I think about my food, and this doesn't have to be that complicated, is you want to think about certain things. So spice, yes, herb, yes, but then acid and salt, and if it's not too irritating, chili and umami. So acid can be as simple as a little squeeze of lemon juice or a little drizzle of vinegar to finish the meal. Acid really brightens all the flavors. Salt, as long as your blood pressure is okay and you're not on sodium restriction from your doctor. When you're cooking whole foods, cooking with a little bit of salt, you're going to have room in your sodium budget for that. A little hit of chili flakes to add that heat, as long as they don't feel irritating to you, is a great way to go. And then umami, I talked about that 5th taste, which essentially is this sort of savory deliciousness. We have lots of low FODMAP options, like nutritional yeast, like miso, like soy sauce, to help build that umami in. And then for those of you who are missing your garlic and onions, there are garlic flavored low FODMAP olive oils available, really easy to find. Green onions, when I make low FODMAP recipes, the dark green tops of the green onions are such an incredible way to have that flavor without the FODMAPs. And the best part about only using the green tops is if you sit the white bulb ends in a little bit of water, they will regrow the tops. So you don't have to waste those ends. You can regrow more greens by putting them in a windowsill. And then you don't have to worry about waste, but you also get that garlic flavor. And then I also want to mention asafoetida and kala namak. Kala namak is also sometimes called black salt. Both of these things have a little bit of that sulfur note that we get from garlic and onions. Just the tiniest pinch can help to lift the flavor of your meals. Now, once you've got it sorted at home, then we have to leave the house eventually. You know, it is really difficult to dine out confidently, particularly when you are on your strict low FODMAP phase. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is a little bit challenging. And so what are the strategies for success? First things first, seek out restaurants that are sort of naturally dietary friendly. Like when restaurants advertise on their website or on their menus, gluten-free options or vegan options, like you know that restaurant's already sort of thinking about dietary stuff. They're going to be easier than ones that are like no substitutions ever. The next step is to research the menus and call ahead at non-peak times. Do not call a restaurant at like 7 p.m. prime dinner time, asking them like what on their menu is low FODMAP. They're not going to appreciate it. And they may not even pick up the phone. So you can go on the menu and say, oh, I see you have this dish that is grilled chicken with, you know, like a salad. And you can say, is there garlic in the grilled chicken, you know, marinade? Because there's a lot of hidden FODMAPs in even foods that look a little bit plainer. The other thing that's a really good idea is have a low FODMAP snack before you go to the restaurant, just in case the option at the restaurant is a little less filling because you've had to remove certain things that are high FODMAP. So better bets are salads without the dressing. There's almost always going to be garlic and onion, but you can do it with like a nice oil and vinegar. You just ask for oil and vinegar to dress your salad. Grilled proteins and vegetables without the sauces. Plain burgers on a gluten-free bun. Many restaurants have gluten-free buns. Remember, it's not the gluten itself, it's that the gluten-free bun will not be made with wheat, which is where you're getting your fructans. Sushi is often a great option because they're very simple. You know, there's not a lot of sauces on it. It is the fish or the vegetables, the rice and the seaweed. All of those things are low FODMAP on their own. And then, of course, sometimes you can make a really lovely dish from simple sides. So fried eggs, you know, at breakfast, for example, or rice or steamed veggies. And sometimes one of the things we notice, and we mentioned, even when low FODMAP feels like it's moving things for you, it may not be enough. And this is when you should talk with your dietitian to consider other supports. You know, there's a lot of confusion and misinformation around probiotics, but there are certain probiotics, like our friends at BioK Plus, that have randomized controlled trials to support their efficacy in IBS. A great option for this is something called the probiotic chart. So if you go probioticchart.ca, this is a list of all of the evidence-based probiotics in Canada, and you can see the brand name, the strains of probiotic they use, as well as what they're good for and what the level of evidence is. And so you can see, is something good for IBS-D versus IBS-C? Do they have level 1 evidence, which means at least one randomized controlled trial? You want to stick, if you are going to choose a probiotic, you want to stick with the evidence-based probiotics. Another evidence-based tool that many people aren't aware of is enteric-coated peppermint oil. So while a probiotic may be addressing the microbiome, peppermint oil works a different way. It's called an antispasmodic, which means it helps to reduce the spasms, AKA smooth out the smooth muscle of the gut. And so for that very sort of like crampy pain, peppermint oil can be really helpful. The enteric coating means that it bypasses the stomach because peppermint oil can make you a little bit more refluxy because, again, it's relaxing the smooth muscle, which is what keeps your stomach from refluxing. Something else that might surprise you is that gut-directed hypnotherapy exists, and we have limited research, but the research does suggest that gut-directed hypnotherapy, which is something you just put in your headphones and listen to this like hypnotherapy script, it can be as effective as the low FODMAP diet for some people because of that gut-brain connection. So worthwhile exploring if low FODMAP isn't working or it's just not working well enough. And then we talk so much about fibers and how fibers can sometimes make you feel better and sometimes make you feel worse. Gentle fibers, so soluble and low fermentation fibers, might be a great tool in your toolkit. This is something like psyllium husk or partially hydrolyzed guar gum. Talk to your pharmacist or your dietitian about these and how to utilize them in your day. Now, if low FODMAP isn't right for you, and there can be so many reasons why, there's too much going on for you right now, you have a history of restrictive or disordered eatings, or for whatever reason, there are alternative paths. The first is what is called often a FODMAP light or a FODMAP gentle approach. And this is where we avoid only the most major offenders. The idea being that for many people, as long as you take out these things, you're going to reduce your FODMAPs enough and reduce your gas producing enough that you might actually feel a lot better. So things like wheat and rye, milk and yogurt, stone fruits. What do I mean by that? That is like the peaches, the nectarines, those are stone fruits. Apples and pears, cauliflower, mushroom, alliums, dried fruit, legumes, so the beans and lentils, and watermelon. So you can try that. Another option is that FODMAP-focused digestive enzymes exist. This isn't the digestive enzymes you buy at the health food store. These are specific to break down FODMAPs so that when you apply them to the food, they break down the FODMAPs for you so you digest and absorb more, meaning less is available to your gut microbiome. And then, of course, seeing a dietitian for individualized nutrition therapy. We do so many different things in practice. We may alter your fiber intake. We might help you do a diet and symptom journal where we can pinpoint specific trigger or gas-producing foods and then avoid only those. And we can take a very gentle nutrition approach as well, where we create a diet that is a lot easier on digestion, whether we choose easier to digest foods outright or we do a lot of blended smoothies, soups, those kind of things that help make harder to digest foods easier to digest. So there are so many options available to you if you're like, low FODMAP does not sound like the thing for me, so what do I do? So in summary, low FODMAP eating is incredible. It's an incredible breakthrough, and it can be helpful for many people, but it's not for everyone, and it's not your only path to success. When we're low FODMAP, we want to pay attention to low FODMAP fiber sources so that we're thinking about our elimination and our digestion now, but also for the long term. It is possible, if you're vegetarian and vegan when you're diagnosed with IBS, believe me, it is possible to get adequate protein and mineral intake while low FODMAP. And then remember, enjoying what you eat is an important part of any healthy eating program. So really lean into those spices, herbs, and other low FODMAP flavor boosters. So I hope you've learned at least a couple of nuggets that you can take along with you to improve your life while you're low FODMAP. A few Q&As came in ahead of me recording this session, so I wanted to speak to them here. Also, you'll notice here, I can move this. There we go. Hi. So Good for Your Gut. I wrote a book on digestive health nutrition. It is a therapeutic cookbook. So there's 100 pages of nutrition up front. And then the recipes, including low FODMAP recipes. So that's available to you at your library, at your local bookshop, if you want to learn more. So the first Q&A is, what is a modified FODMAP diet? So sometimes people say this in reference to the FODMAP light approach. So where we just remove or reduce the few high FODMAP foods. Most often in practice, when we say a modified FODMAP diet, this represents what happens when we've gone through the low FODMAP elimination, we've done the challenges, and we've identified the FODMAPs that cause us symptoms. And so for the long term, we're bringing back all of the foods and all of the FODMAP containing foods that don't really trigger our symptoms while staying mindful and reducing the ones that do. So a great example could be you might have noticed that it was the osmotic sugars for you. It's the fructose and the lactose that are really causing these loose stools, while fructans in wheat and garlic may not be a problem for you. So going forward, you're going to watch your high fructose and high lactose foods, whereas the other foods are going to be okay. Others may find that fructans are the things that really increase gas and bloating and pain for them, whereas they can consume all the lactose and fructose they want. So modified FODMAP is the long-term adaptation of your diet to minimize your symptoms while increasing the diversity and variety of your diet as much as possible. The other question we had is around low FODMAP living in university. And so this question I feel like is probably specifically if you are living in residence and dining out on the food plan while also probably having limited kitchen resources. This can be a real challenge. Just it is dining out, but it's dining out 3 meals a day. So here are a couple of things. The first thing is if someone suggests you try the low FODMAP diet, while you're in the middle of a semester, this might not be the right time for you. This might be something that you try other strategies, such as gentle nutrition or gut-directed hypnotherapy, which you can do every day. And then if that doesn't work, maybe in the summer when semester is out, then you try low FODMAP. But if you're already sort of in it or you're in this modified low FODMAP, the dining out recommendations are really your best bet. But the other thing that I will say for university students is not all universities, but some have dietitians who are part of the food service. And so you can contact them. I know I'm a UBC alumni, and they have dietitians part of the food service. And you can contact them to say, what do you suggest I do? Typically, the simpler foods, great example is like oatmeal. You're going to get your oatmeal there as opposed to having the pastries. So use your knowledge of what's low FODMAP, identify the simpler foods, the salad bar where we're not going to do the dressing. We can take those salad bar foods too and add them as a side to maybe something else. And you can sort of like mix and match your own like veggie bowl or grain bowl, stick with the very simple proteins, add those on. So really it is about a dining out approach, just 3 meals a day. But if you have dietitians on campus, please use them. They can really help you navigate this. The other question I had was about low FODMAP drinks. I wasn't sure which you were meaning, like daily drinks or special occasion drinks. So I wanted to offer both here. Black coffee, low FODMAP, all of these are low FODMAP. So the one I will mention is the weak black tea. Strongly brewed black tea is actually high FODMAP. So a weak black tea would be something you like steep for a minute and then remove, as opposed to something you steep for like 3, 4, 5 minutes. Peppermint tea is great. Rooibos tea is great. Chamomile tea is high FODMAP. You want to avoid that. And then many beers, wines, and clear spirits are also low FODMAP. So there are lots of options there. I want to say thank you so much for joining me. As I said, I hope you found at least a couple of nuggets that you can take with you to help you thrive while you're low FODMAP, but also for the long term, from like one person with IBS to another. I know that this can be a challenge, but also you can feel much, much better and really love what you eat and feel well nourished while you are low FODMAP. So thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentations associated with Trending Now.